I sit in the dim light of a trembling candle, my hands still shaking as I recount the horrors I witnessed. I am the sole survivor of that fateful weekend, a time when I learned that the dark corners of the world harbor secrets far beyond human comprehension. I never imagined that a simple retreat to a cabin in the woods would unspool into a nightmare that would forever haunt my soul. It began on a chilly autumn evening when my friends and I decided to escape the bustle of everyday life. We journeyed deep into the forest to a secluded cabin that promised tranquility and respite. The old wooden structure, with its creaking floors and a fireplace that beckoned us for warmth, exuded an inviting charm. Yet, as we drove along the winding road, an inexplicable chill slithered down my spine, as if the very air warned me of the malevolence waiting ahead. That first night, as we gathered around the fire, the conversation turned to local legends. Karen, one of my closest friends, whispered in a trembling voice, "They say this land is cursed. The cabin was built over ancient burial grounds." Her words, spoken in the flickering firelight, struck a disquieting chord within me. I found myself questioning whether our presence was an innocent coincidence or the unwitting trigger of something long dormant. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had trespassed on a boundary not meant for the living. As midnight approached, the forest outside seemed to come alive with eerie sounds. The wind morphed into a chorus of ghostly whispers, and the rustle of leaves took on a sinister tone. I stepped out onto the porch for a breath of fresh air and caught sight of movement in the shadows, fleeting silhouettes darting among the trees. My heart pounded so fiercely I feared it would break through my chest. I called out for my friends, but they had sunk into a fitful sleep, leaving me to confront the encroaching darkness alone. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with dread. I bolted the door and huddled by the window, watching as the forest seemed to close in on me. Every creak of the old structure, every groan of the wind echoed like a death knell. I could feel unseen eyes tracking my every move, and a profound terror began to take root deep within me. The quiet was shattered only by my own ragged breathing and the relentless pounding of my heart. Then came the scream, a blood-curdling, unearthly sound that sliced through the silence of the night. I leapt from my bed and raced towards the source, my legs propelled by pure panic. In the hall, I found Karen, her face ashen, her eyes wide with terror. "I saw them," she whispered hoarsely. "Figures in the shadows. They're coming for us." Her voice was barely audible over the pounding of my own heart. The moment was surreal, as if time had slowed and we were trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. The night spiraled into chaos. One by one, more unexplainable sounds shattered our fragile sense of safety, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, soft footsteps that moved with deliberate intent, and the distant, mournful cries of something not quite human. I remember the oppressive weight of the darkness, the sensation of being enveloped by an unseen force that sought to devour every ounce of hope. It was as if the cabin had become a living entity, its ancient walls pulsing with a malevolent energy. When the first light of dawn finally broke through the dense canopy, we gathered in the main room, our eyes red and haunted by the horrors of the night. We discovered strange symbols carved into the wooden beams, that markings that none of us could decipher. Karen, still trembling, insisted that the carvings were part of an old ritual, a forbidden summoning intended to awaken a long-forgotten evil. The realization hit me hard. Our presence in that cabin was no accident. We had unwittingly stepped into a trap set by forces far older and more sinister than we could ever imagine. The day offered no reprieve. As dusk crept in once again, the oppressive atmosphere returned with renewed vigor. Shadows danced in impossible patterns, twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes that defied explanation. I found myself plagued by nightmares, visions of being dragged into the forest by cold, skeletal hands, my screams swallowed by the encroaching void. Each morning I awoke, drenched in sweat, the terror of my dreams lingering like a dark specter over my thoughts. Then came the night that changed everything. A sudden power outage plunged the cabin into an abyss of darkness. In that suffocating blackness, I heard slow, deliberate footsteps traversing the creaky wooden floor. My pulse raced as I realized we were not alone. Faint whispers in an unknown tongue slithered through the air, seeping into my mind with an insidious intent. Summoning every ounce of courage, I grabbed a candle and crept towards the basement. where I hoped to find some rational explanation for the unfolding horror. In the basement's flickering light, I uncovered relics and dusty journals that recounted dark rituals and ancient lore. The entries detailed the binding of a malevolent spirit, a force imprisoned by forgotten ancestors, now desperate to break free and reclaim its dominion. My hands trembled as I read the final entry, which ominously warned that once awakened, the entity would stop at nothing to claim the souls of the living. A cold dread settled over me as I pieced together the grim truth. Our presence had awakened this slumbering horror. Desperation gripped me as the evening wore on. My friends, paralyzed by fear, began to vanish one by one, each disappearance a silent surrender to the encroaching darkness. I was left alone to confront the wrath of an ancient evil. I can still recall the terror in their eyes, a silent plea for rescue that I could not answer. Every creak, every whisper in the dark drove me closer to the brink of insanity, and yet I clung to a fragile hope of escape. I made my final bid for freedom on that dreadful night. I crept towards the front door, every sense on high alert, when suddenly the malevolent presence manifested before me. A hideous figure emerged from the shadows, a contorted visage with burning eyes and a grotesque smile that promised endless torment. In that moment, time seemed to slow as I stood frozen, paralyzed by the realization that the curse of the cabin was inexorable. Mustering every scrap of courage, I managed to slip past the abomination and sprint into the cold, unforgiving forest. Now, as I sit here in the relative safety of my home, I am tormented by memories that refuse to fade. The forest remains a dark, forbidding place, and that cursed cabin stands as a grim monument to the forces that dwell beyond the veil of our understanding. I have tried to warn others, but many dismiss my account as the ramblings of a broken mind. Yet, I know what I experienced was real, a truth etched in the silent screams of the lost and in the tormented whispers that echo through the trees. The scars of that weekend have never truly healed, and each night as darkness envelops me, I hear the faint ghostly cries calling from the woods. My story is not one of survival triumph, but a desperate plea, a warning to anyone who dares venture into places where the supernatural reigns unchecked. Beware the allure of secluded cabins and ancient forests, for once you disturb the slumber of the past, the horrors you unleash may follow you for the rest of your days. Our chilling tale concludes here. Ready for the next ghostly whisper? I remember the night I left that cursed cabin as clearly as if it were yesterday. My name is Daniel, and I'm still haunted by the memories of that autumn evening. It began with an impulsive decision to join my friend Mia and her brother Sam for a weekend getaway in the remote woods of northern Vermont. We had heard rumors of a forgotten cabin that lay hidden among towering pines and rolling fog. The locals spoke of strange occurrences and unexplained sounds echoing through the forest at night. Despite the warnings, we were drawn by the promise of solitude and adventure. The cabin itself was an odd relic, a weathered structure half swallowed by the forest, its faded paint and broken windows giving it an eerie, abandoned look. Yet, as we approached, it seemed almost inviting. I stepped out of the car, feeling the chill of the crisp air and the weight of foreboding that settled over the clearing. With a hesitant smile, Mia reassured us, "It's just a little old cabin. We'll have a great time here." But her smile couldn't mask the nervous tremor in her voice. Inside, the cabin was shrouded in shadows. The only light came from the weak rays of the moon filtering through the grime on the windows. A dilapidated fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth cold and uninviting. Sam, ever the optimist, joked about turning the place into a haunted hotel, but even he couldn't hide the edge of uncertainty in his eyes. We unpacked and set about making ourselves comfortable, though the silence of the cabin seemed to echo with memories of the past. That first night, as we sat around a small table, the wind outside began to whisper and moan in a manner that defied explanation. The sound wasn't merely the rustling of leaves, it was as if the forest itself was speaking in a language older than time. I tried to dismiss it as just nature's song, but deep down, I knew something was terribly off. Later, as we settled into our makeshift beds in the cramped living area, I couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes were watching us. I awoke in the dead of night to a sound that froze my blood, a low, mournful moan drifting through the silence. The noise seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, as if the old wood was crying out in agony. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened intently. The sound grew louder, interspersed with a series of soft, almost imperceptible footsteps moving around the cabin. I called out to Mia and Sam, but they remained in uneasy slumber. Paralyzed by fear, I crept toward the door, desperate to see what was causing this unearthly disturbance. Outside, the forest was a mass of twisting silhouettes. The moon had vanished behind a thick curtain of clouds, plunging everything into an inky darkness that swallowed the weak beam of my flashlight. I strained my eyes to see, when suddenly I glimpsed a figure, a pale, gaunt shape, standing near the edge of the tree line. For a heartbeat, I thought it was Mia, but the figure's face was blank, its eyes deep voids that offered no comfort. Before I could speak, it melted back into the darkness, leaving me trembling with fear and uncertainty. In the days that followed, the presence around the cabin became impossible to ignore. Doors creaked open on their own, and objects moved inexplicably from one place to another. At one point, I found a dusty journal tucked beneath a loose floorboard. Its pages were filled with frantic scribbles and desperate pleas. The entries recounted how a previous occupant had invoked an ancient spirit, unknowingly binding it to the cabin. The writer warned that the spirit was restless, seeking revenge on anyone who dared disturb its slumber. I couldn't help but feel that our arrival had been the catalyst for awakening that long-dormant terror. Mia began experiencing unsettling visions. She would often stare into the distance with a haunted look in her eyes, murmuring about voices that only she could hear. Sam, usually the pillar of strength, grew increasingly withdrawn, spending long hours outside under the overcast sky, as if trying to communicate with something invisible. Their transformations were gradual yet undeniable, and as I watched them, I felt the sinister energy of the cabin tightening its grip around us. One particularly stormy night, the air was thick with a sense of impending doom. Rain lashed the cabin with relentless fury, and thunder rolled across the sky like an ominous drumbeat. I awoke to find Mia standing at the foot of my bed, her eyes wide with terror. "Daniel," she whispered, voice trembling, "it's here. It's come back for us." Her words were barely audible over the howling wind, but they sent a shiver down my spine. I tried to reassure her, but my own voice betrayed the fear I felt. Suddenly, the temperature in the room plummeted, and a shadow stretched across the wall, a dark, undulating form that seemed to pulse with life. The air grew heavy, as if laden with sorrow and malice. In that moment, I knew we were no longer alone. The spirit that had been bound to the cabin had been roused from its slumber, and it was intent on exacting its revenge. In a desperate bid for survival, I gathered Mia and Sam and urged them to flee. We bolted out the door into the raging storm, our hearts pounding in unison. The forest, usually familiar and comforting, now appeared as a labyrinth of terror. Every rustle, every crack of a branch in the wind sounded like a warning. We stumbled along the muddy path, driven by a singular instinct to escape the malevolent force that pursued us. At one point, we reached a clearing where the trees formed a natural barrier. We thought we might find refuge there, but the clearing was marked by a circle of ancient stones, each etched with symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. The ground beneath them seemed to vibrate with a rhythmic pulse, a heartbeat of the earth itself. I realized with dawning horror that these stones were not mere relics. They were part of an age-old ritual, a gateway for the spirit to manifest in our world. My legs felt leaden as we fought against the pull of the forest. Every step was a struggle, as if the very ground sought to hold us captive. Amid the chaos, I heard a chilling laugh, a sound not entirely human, filled with malice and ancient sorrow. It echoed through the trees, mingling with the storm's fury. I knew then that the spirit was toying with us, drawing us deeper into its sinister domain. Time lost all meaning in that relentless night. We wandered until our bodies were exhausted and the first light of dawn began to break through the storm clouds. The forest, once a realm of nightmares, now lay silent and forlorn. We had survived, but at a terrible cost. Mia and Sam were forever changed, their eyes reflecting the darkness they had witnessed. I, too, bore scars, deep, unhealable marks etched not on my skin, but within my soul. I left that haunted forest that day, carrying with me a story that I can never forget. The cabin remains hidden in the wilderness, a dark testament to the ancient power that still lingers among the trees. I have tried to warn others of the dangers of disturbing the balance between our world and the realm of spirits, but many dismiss my account as the ravings of a man touched by madness. Our chilling tale concludes here. Ready for the next ghostly whisper? I still remember that fateful autumn when I sought refuge in an isolated cabin nestled deep in the heart of the northern woodlands, a place that locals whispered about in hushed tones. I was not on vacation. I was on the run from a past that had broken me, desperate for solitude and an opportunity to mend my shattered spirit. Little did I know that the peace I sought would be shattered by a presence that haunted every crevice of that forlorn dwelling. I arrived under a sky smeared with the colors of twilight. The cabin, a small, weather-worn structure of gray stone and splintered wood, sat atop a rocky knoll encircled by gnarled pine trees. Its appearance was unassuming, but as I stepped through the creaking door, an odd chill swept over me, as if I were unwittingly crossing into another realm. The air inside was stale, yet weighed down by a coldness that hinted at secrets long suppressed. I was alone, or so I believed. I spent the first night exploring the compact interior, stacking my few belongings and trying to rearrange the space into something that felt like a safe haven. The only company was an antique mirror hanging above a dusty side table and a record player with a collection of melancholic tunes. As I unpacked, I felt an unsettling sensation of being observed, but each time I turned, there was only the eerie silence of the abandoned night. That first evening passed with little incident aside from an inexplicable series of soft knocks along the cabin walls. I dismissed them as the building settling and the wind weaving its way through broken window panes. Sleep eventually claimed me, but it was a fitful, uneasy sleep, as though my dreams were haunted by remnants of memories that were never mine. At dawn, I awoke to find muddy footprints leading from the back door to the fireplace. They were small, almost childlike, yet too deliberate to be the mere play of animals. I felt a shudder run down my spine. I cleaned the prints away, convincing myself it was nothing more than an animal exploring the old building. However, a subtle feeling of dread clung to me as the day unfolded. That night, the atmosphere changed dramatically. Heavy rain battered the cabin, echoing the despair I felt deep within. I settled in with a book by the dim light of a flickering lantern when an odd sound startled me, a creaking noise from the attic. Forced by both curiosity and trepidation, I ascended the narrow, spiraling staircase leading to a cramped attic filled with relics of lives long past. The space was crowded with dusty trunks and forgotten photographs, but what caught my attention was a small porcelain doll lying face down on a battered trunk. Its cracked eyes seemed to glimmer in the faint light as if imbued with a sorrowful consciousness. Before I could retrieve the doll to inspect it more closely, a low, guttural whisper echoed around me. The voice was not of this world, filled with melancholy and malice at once. "Return, return," it intoned, leaving me frozen in terror amidst the relics of another era. I bolted down the stairs, the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as I fled to the relative safety of the living area. As the storm raged outside, I barricaded every door and window, trying to fend off the palpable heaviness that crept under every crack and crevice. I could not shake the feeling that I had intruded upon something that was never meant for the living, some sorrowful echo of past tragedies. For reasons I could not explain, the doll I had discovered seemed to be the centerpiece of these inexplicable occurrences, binding the spectral energy of the place to its fragile frame. Over the next several nights, the true horror of the cabin began to unravel itself. In restless dreams, I wandered through endless corridors and vast empty halls that were clearly not part of the small cabin's layout. I encountered figures draped in old-fashioned garments, their faces blurred by mist and time. They beckoned me silently, their eyes filled with despair, urging me to follow them into the void beyond. I would wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing, only to find the doll in my hand, its porcelain skin inexplicably cold to the touch. Determined to understand what I was experiencing, I began to search the attic and other hidden corners of the cabin for clues. In one of the dusty boxes, I uncovered a collection of faded photographs and handwritten letters that spoke of a family who once lived there. Their story was one of profound loss, betrayal, and a mysterious disappearance that had never been resolved. The letters hinted at a forbidden ritual intended to keep an unspeakable evil at bay, a promise that had been broken, and a consequence that now seemed to haunt the very walls of the cabin. In one weathered note, scrawled in trembling ink, was the directive to never let the lost remain among us. The words chilled me to the core. As I pieced together the fragments of this tragic history, the phenomena around me grew ever more intense. Poltergeist activity became routine. Objects flew off shelves, doors slammed shut, and the oppressive weight of grief and anger made it nearly impossible to breathe. At one point, as I sat attempting to document my experiences in a worn journal, I felt a sudden, searing pain in my chest, like invisible hands clutched at me in despair. I glanced up to find a spectral figure hovering by the window. A woman, her face a mask of unbearable sorrow, her eyes brimming with silent accusation. She pointed at the doll with trembling fingers, her voice a mere whisper of regret and forewarning. "You must put it to rest." That was the moment I understood. The doll was the conduit for the anger and sorrow of those who had perished in a curse that had befallen the family. It was their talisman, binding them to the mortal plane, forced to linger in eternal torment. In that dim, rain-soaked night, I resolved that if I had any hope of liberation, for both myself and the souls trapped within, I needed to find a way to return the doll to rightful resting place. The following day, I dragged the heavy, sorrowful relic into the heart of the forest. The woods were a tangle of damp undergrowth and ancient trees whose branches clawed at the sky like skeletal arms. Guided by the cryptic clues from the letters and a faint, ethereal glow emanating from deep within a clearing, I discovered a weathered stone altar half buried by time. The inscription on the altar, now barely legible, mentioned the Guardians of the Lost. With trembling hands, I placed the doll upon the altar and recited the final lines of the incantation I had painstakingly assembled from the old letters. As soon as the words left my lips, the ground trembled, and a strange, luminous mist enshrouded the area. The oppressive aura of the cabin and the souls bound to it seemed to lift, replaced by a profound, lingering silence. For a few long moments, nothing stirred but the soft rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. Then, as if in gratitude, a quiet wind whispered through the clearing, carrying away what felt like years of sorrow and torment. I returned to the cabin that evening, expecting to find emptiness in place of the malevolence that had plagued me. Instead, I found the atmosphere markedly lighter, the suffocating cold replaced with a gentle warmth. The spirit of the grieving woman had vanished, and with her departure came a cascade of memories that no longer hurled the weight of dread upon my soul. It was as if I had helped to finally set a tragedy to rest, though the echoes of that terrible, long-forgotten past would never fully dissipate. Now, as I sit here recalling that harrowing experience, I cannot help but wonder about the thin veil between our world and the next. There are places like that forsaken cabin where the past has a way of haunting the present, where voices from beyond murmur our names, and where lost souls wander in search of redemption. I leave you with the recollection of my ordeal, a story not just of terror, but of the desperate hope to liberate those forever imprisoned by sorrow. Our chilling tale concludes here. Ready for the next ghostly whisper? The first time I saw the cabin, it looked abandoned. No signs of life, no sound, just a crumbling structure swallowed by a forest that hadn't seen light in decades. My friends and I, Cassie, Darren, Liz, and me, Jonah, were on a weekend trip meant to be spontaneous, thrilling, one of those before we all go our separate ways kind of things. We'd followed a local trail that supposedly looped around back to town, but someone had the bright idea to take a detour, and that's when we stumbled on it. The cabin sat at the bottom of a hollow surrounded by trees twisted like arthritic fingers. Its roof sagged and the windows were either broken or completely blacked out. It didn't feel right from the start, like the earth itself didn't want it there anymore. Darren joked that we should explore it. What's the worst that could happen? And despite every warning sign in my gut, we followed him. Inside, it smelled like damp wood and mold, but worse. Something sour, metallic. The floor creaked under our weight, and the only light came from the slivers of late afternoon sun leaking through the broken boards. We poked around while Liz filmed everything on her phone for one of her YouTube videos. She thought it was all fake horror vibes, but I knew better. This place wasn't pretending. There was a strange room in the back, completely empty except for a massive floor-to-ceiling mirror. It looked untouched, perfectly clean despite the decay around it. Cassie stepped in front of it and froze. "That's not right," she said. I looked over her shoulder, and what we saw made my blood freeze. Our reflections were different. In the mirror, we looked pale, emaciated. Our eyes were completely black, mouths hanging open just enough to show that each of us was missing teeth. Dozens. Liz laughed it off until her reflection raised its hand before she did. We all saw it. The copy of her in the mirror was acting on its own. We backed away, and that's when the cabin started breathing. I know how insane that sounds, but you could hear it. Groaning beams and walls expanding and contracting like a rib cage. The air thickened with the stench of rotting meat, and the temperature plummeted. Our phones stopped working. The compass app on mine spun in slow, lazy circles no matter which way I turned. We tried to leave. The front door wouldn't open. Darren kicked at it until his leg gave out. Then we tried the windows, nailed shut from the outside. Panic set in quick. Cassie started hyperventilating. Liz just kept muttering, "It's a trick. It's a trick. It's just the mirror." But then we heard it. Footsteps upstairs. Slow. Heavy. We hadn't even noticed the staircase before. It was like the cabin was rearranging itself. We argued over whether we should hide or confront whatever was up there, but in the end, curiosity got the better of us. Darren led the way, flashlight trembling in his grip. The steps moaned beneath us like something old and hungry was waking up every footfall. At the top was a hallway lined with closed doors, none of which had been there minutes ago. The first door led to a child's bedroom. Everything was coated in thick dust, but there were drawings pinned to the wall. They were disturbing, stick figures hanging from trees. One picture showed a family sitting around a dinner table with one empty seat circled in red marker. Underneath it, in a child's handwriting, was scribbled, "He's still hungry." We backed out. As soon as the door shut behind us, Cassie screamed. The hallway had changed. It now stretched on in both directions, impossibly long, like a hotel corridor that went on forever. Every door looked the same now. None of us could agree on where we'd come from. That's when the lights flickered and the mirrors appeared. Dozens of them. On every door, every wall, and in every single one of them, our reflections were watching us. Not moving, just watching. Except one. My reflection blinked. I backed away, but the moment I turned, I found myself alone. The hallway was empty. No Liz, no Cassie, no Darren. I started running, screaming their names, pounding on doors that led to nowhere, closets filled with wet leaves, staircases that ended in blank walls, rooms with no floors. I opened one door and saw myself standing at the edge of the forest, staring up at the cabin. I swear to you, I was watching myself from inside. That version of me turned and walked away, leaving me behind. Eventually, I found a room that looked like the main living area from earlier. There was a fireplace crackling with fire now, though we had never lit it. A figure stood in front of it, cloaked in shadow, too tall, too still. I asked, "Where are my friends?" The figure turned. Its face was blank, skin like stretched wax, but the voice it spoke with was my own. "They're here," it said, "but you won't remember them soon." And I didn't. When I woke up, I was lying at the edge of the woods alone, not far from where we'd first seen the cabin. The sky was bright, clear, like nothing had happened. My phone had 3% battery, no signal, and dozens of photos I don't remember taking. Most were of the mirror. Some were of us, only our faces were wrong. Blurred, like they'd been moving too fast for the camera. Cassie, Darren, and Liz were never found. The police searched for weeks. I told them we got separated on the trail, that they probably just got lost, but I know better. I see them sometimes in dreams, sometimes in mirrors too. Their reflections smile, but their eyes are empty. And lately, I hear something when I sleep, something scratching just behind the glass of my bathroom mirror. He's still hungry. Our chilling tale concludes here. Ready for the next ghostly whisper? I never imagined I'd live to tell this tale, yet here I am, compelled to recount every chilling moment that unfolded in that cursed cabin. I'm still haunted by the memories, by the shadowy figures I saw lurking in the dark of night, and by the eerie sounds echoing through the trees. It was supposed to be a brief getaway, a chance to escape the stress of life and reconnect with nature, but it quickly became the nightmare of my existence. I arrived at the cabin on a crisp autumn afternoon, the fading sunlight casting long, ghostly shadows across the gravel drive. At first glance, the cabin seemed quaint, almost charming with its rustic wooden exterior and the promise of solitude. But even then, there was an unsettling feeling, as if the place was hiding secrets too dark to speak aloud. I shrugged off my unease, attributing it to the isolation of the location, and stepped inside. The interior was sparse, furnished with only the essentials, and carried a lingering scent of damp wood and something indefinable, an odor that hinted at decay and forgotten memories. I set my bags down and took a deep breath. "This is it," I whispered to myself, trying to muster the courage for a quiet retreat. Little did I know how far removed from peace I was about to be. The first night was not unusual enough to disturb my sleep. I sat by the small fireplace, reading a worn book, when an inexplicable tapping came from outside the window. At first, I believed it was merely a branch brushing against the glass, stirred by the wind. But the sound grew rhythmically insistent, almost deliberate, drawing my eyes to the dark forest beyond. I peered out, but saw nothing except the dense, impenetrable shadow of trees. I tried to focus back on my book, but unease had crept into the corners of my mind. When the clock struck midnight, I woke to a series of faint whispers in the corridor outside my room. They were indistinct, barely audible, yet somehow laden with malice. I wasn't alone in the cabin. Gathering the little courage I had left, I rose from bed, armed only with a flashlight, and crept toward the sound. Every step felt like it echoed louder than the last in the silent hall. The whispers led me to the doorway of a room I had not seen before, a room that wasn't on the floor plan I had studied earlier. The door hung ajar as if inviting me in. I pushed it open and found an old, dust-covered journal on a rickety table. Flipping through its brittle pages, I discovered unsettling entries written in a shaky hand. They spoke of rituals, sinister legends of the forest, and the presence of something that dwelled in the dark recesses of the woods. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized that the cabin was not merely abandoned or forgotten, it was a gateway to something far more sinister. Confusion and fear wrestled within me as I returned to my room, my mind awash with paranoia. The following night, the atmosphere grew even more oppressive. Rain hammered against the windows as if nature itself sought to wash away the horrors within. I heard footsteps outside my door, slow, deliberate steps that circled my room repeatedly. I fumbled for my phone, but even my device was rendered useless, its screen flickering with a static pattern that offered no solace. In the midst of this terror, I whispered, "Who's there?" But the only response was the thunder of the storm and my own ragged breathing. The terror peaked around 3 a.m. when the temperature in the cabin dropped abruptly. I awoke to an icy cold that seeped into my bones. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into total darkness. And then I saw it. A pale, ghostly figure standing in the corner of my room. Its eyes, empty and accusing, seemed to burn through the darkness. I couldn't move, paralyzed by fear as it slowly drifted closer, its presence an unbearable weight of despair. The apparition whispered in a voice like the rustling of dead leaves, a single word repeated over and over, "Remember." Before I could react, it vanished, leaving behind an oppressive silence and a lingering dread. In the following days, I attempted to leave the cabin, but the forest around it seemed to have a will of its own, ensnaring me in a labyrinth of tangled undergrowth and deceptive paths. No matter which direction I chose, I found myself retracing my steps, returning to that cursed clearing where the cabin stood like an omen. Each return was marked by new horrors, a broken mirror that reflected scenes of unspeakable rituals, symbols etched into tree bark that glowed faintly in the moonlight, and shadows that moved independently of the wind. I was caught in a cycle of despair and confusion, unable to escape the influence of the dark forest. Days melded into nights filled with a cacophony of creaks, groans, and whispers that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the cabin. I began to record my experiences, desperate to piece together what had happened, and to warn anyone who might be tempted by the allure of isolation. The journal I found had hinted at a past laden with despair, a family that once lived here, whose secrets were buried in the soil, and whose fate had been sealed by ancient forces. It was as if the cabin had become a magnet for sorrow, drawing in the lost and the desperate. I often spoke aloud into the empty room, my voice trembling as I recounted the events, seeking some form of confirmation that I wasn't imagining everything. "This is real. I have seen them," I would insist to the silent shadows. The cabin, my reluctant prison, seemed to mock my distress, its very existence a testament to the relentless power of the unknown. I made one final, desperate attempt to escape. Packing only the essentials, I set out at dawn, the light of the early sun offering a fragile promise of safety. But as I reached the edge of the clearing, I heard the faint murmurs of voices behind me. I turned slowly, heart pounding like a war drum, and saw silhouettes emerging from the mist. They were not human, at least, not entirely. Their forms warped between that of a human and something monstrous, their eyes voids of emptiness, and their voices a chorus of despair. Frozen in terror, I could only watch as they advanced, their unhurried march echoing the inexorable approach of my doom. That was the moment when I knew that I would never truly be free from the curse of the cabin. My escape had been orchestrated by forces beyond my control, leaving me trapped in their relentless grasp. I eventually returned to the cabin, a broken soul wandering amidst the decaying remnants of my sanity, forced to confront the horrors I'd awakened. In that haunted abode, time seemed to freeze, each day a mirror of the last, each hour marked by the echoing memories of that fateful night. Now, as I sit here, trembling at the dim light of dawn and recounting every grim detail, I realize that some tales are not meant to be forgotten. The cabin and the inexplicable forces within have etched themselves into my soul. I am left with scars both visible and unseen, a constant reminder that the past, no matter how deeply buried, refuses to be silenced. And so, I share my story, hoping that by speaking these words, I might somehow break the cycle of terror that binds this place. Our chilling tale concludes here. Ready for the next ghostly whisper? You never forget the feeling of the dead brushing past you. Cold. Empty. I still remember the way it seeped into my bones that night in the Northern Pines. My name's Mia Delgado, and I was one of 5 interns for a documentary crew shooting a backwoods ghost hunting special in Vermont. We'd heard about a supposedly untraceable cabin deep in the Grover's Hollow forest. Legend said it was cursed, that it only appeared to people who were meant to find it. Idiotic, right? But legends like that make for good TV. The crew leader, Rick, was a full-blown skeptic, more concerned with ratings than actual stories. Creepy cells, he told us, puffing a cigar like some grizzled director. The others, Tasha, Malik, Jen, and me, we just followed orders, hauling gear through miles of forest trails barely marked until we stumbled on something wrong. It wasn't just the cabin, it was the space around it, like the trees leaned away from it. No birds, no bugs, no breeze. Still. Dead still. The cabin looked untouched by time. Sturdy, dark logs, moss along the roofline, and a single window with cracked glass. It didn't look haunted. It looked preserved, like something was keeping it alive. We set up camp outside and planned to film at dusk, classic horror time. Malik flew a drone overhead, but the feed kept glitching out every time it passed over the cabin roof. Some kind of interference, he said, frowning. But no one asked what kind. Around 8 p.m., we went inside. The air shifted the moment we crossed the threshold. Heavier. Like it didn't want us there. Rick started filming, asking dumb questions like, "Is there a spirit with us?" and "Knock once for yes." But the only response was the creaking of old wood. Then Jen found something. A small book, bound in leather, wedged under a broken floorboard. Its pages were filled with names, dozens of them, dated over the last 100 years. All first names, no explanations. At the very end of the list, the last name had been half scratched in. Malik. We laughed it off, nervously. Rick called it a prop, probably left by some bored hiker. Malik wasn't so sure. He got quiet, kept glancing over his shoulder. That night, he didn't join us by the fire. At 2:13 a.m., I remember the time exactly, I woke up to the sound of whispering. Not around me, but inside the tent. Like someone was speaking right by my ear, but I couldn't understand the words. I unzipped the flap slowly, half expecting a prank, but Malik was standing barefoot in the snow-dusted clearing, just staring at the cabin. His mouth was moving, but no sound came out. I called to him. He didn't flinch. When I got close, I touched his shoulder, and he finally looked at me, eyes wide, terrified. "Did you hear her?" he asked. "Hear who?" "The one inside." He turned and ran into the woods before I could stop him. We found his boots the next morning, 400 feet away near the riverbank. No footprints leading away. No Malik. Rick wanted to keep filming. "It's good drama," he said, waving off our protests. "He'll turn up." That afternoon, the cabin's front door was wide open. We hadn't left it that way. Inside, everything had shifted. Furniture had moved, a chair now blocking the staircase that hadn't been there before. Tasha pointed to the ceiling. Words had been scratched into the wooden beams. "Feed the nameless," she screamed when she saw her name etched below it. We tried to leave. The path we'd marked, bright orange tags, remember, was gone. Not one tag. The trees looked closer together, like the forest was sealing us in. That night, Jen said she saw Malik outside her tent, smiling. She ran out after him barefoot, calling his name. When we caught up, all we found was her flashlight, still on, resting on the threshold of the cabin. Only 3 of us left now. Rick, Tasha, and me. We decided to burn the damn thing. Poured gasoline around the perimeter, lit a match. The fire caught, flames danced along the dry timber, but instead of spreading, it reversed. I don't know how else to explain it. The flames got pulled inward, like the house breathed them in. And the moment the fire disappeared, the cabin's windows lit up. All of them. From the inside, silhouettes, dozens. Some stood still, others twitched, but none of them moved naturally. One figure raised its arm and pointed out the window, at Rick. We ran. Hours, maybe longer. I lost track. We found an old ranger station, half collapsed but with a working radio. Rick tried to call for help, but before anyone responded, we heard it again, that whispering, growing louder, from the walls, from the trees, from beneath us. Rick screamed something about feeding the nameless, and then silence. He vanished. Just gone. I passed out sometime after that. When I woke up, I was in a hospital in Montpelier. A hunter had found me wandering alone down a logging road, barefoot and hypothermic. That was 6 days after we entered the woods. They found none of the footage, no cabin, no sign that the others had even been there. I've scoured old maps, records, interviewed locals. There are rumors, yes, about a cabin that calls people in only when it's hungry, about a forest that rearranges itself like a maze, about a spirit, the nameless one, who collects names like coins, feeding off the stories people bring in with them. I still dream of that place. Sometimes I wake up and swear I hear someone whispering my name from the mirror. One time I looked, and for just a second, I swear I saw Malik standing behind me, smiling. Our chilling tale concludes here. Ready for the next ghostly whisper? I remember the first time I set foot near that dilapidated cabin in the woods. The air itself whispered secrets of despair and forgotten tragedies. I was hesitant, yet driven by a reckless curiosity that I would come to regret. The forest stretched endlessly, branches clawing at the dark sky, and as I neared the cabin, a chill ran down my spine. Every step I took seemed to echo with the sorrow of lost souls, the very atmosphere heavy with unspoken dread. I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched by eyes that belonged to another world, and my heart pounded in protest as I reached the creaking, weathered door. Inside, the cabin was frozen in a time both ancient and sorrowful. Dust motes floated in weak beams of light, and the air reeked of decay and damp wood. I felt compelled to explore its every corner. The walls bore strange symbols that I now understand were not mere graffiti, but defiant marks against a malevolence that had once tormented the inhabitants. In the far corner, a tattered journal lay discarded on a rickety table. Its pages chronicled harrowing accounts of mysterious disappearances and unspeakable rituals. Reading those entries, I began to grasp that I was treading where spirits and sinister forces had long reigned, and my terror deepened with each passing minute. At dusk, as a sickly orange light faded into an inky night, I made the fateful decision to camp near the cabin, desperate to uncover the truth behind these spectral stories. The forest around me stirred with unnatural life. I lay awake on the cold, damp ground, and the silence was soon shattered by a distant, guttural hum, like a mournful chant rising from the depths of the earth. I thought it was merely the wind playing tricks on my mind, yet the sound swelled into a chorus of whispered cries that seemed to emanate from every direction. In that moment, I realized I was not alone. The very shadows had eyes, and they were filled with malice. As midnight passed, the first physical sign of the dark presence made itself known. A heavy, oppressive fog rolled in, extinguishing the faint glow of my dying campfire. Panic clutched my chest when I noticed a pair of luminous eyes peering at me from behind a copse of ancient pines. Frozen in terror, I stared at the ghastly sight as the creature slowly advanced. Its limbs twisted unnaturally, and its gait was both deliberate and predatory. I attempted to flee, but my body betrayed me. The ground, slick with rain and moss, turned every step into a slide of despair, and every sound, the crack of a branch or rustle of leaves, echoed ominously, heralding my encroaching doom. I eventually mustered the courage to run, my feet pounding the forest floor in a frantic beat that matched my racing heart. Every instinct screamed at me to escape, yet the malignant presence lurked just at the edge of my vision. The forest transformed into a labyrinth of terror, twisting and turning in ways that defied nature. I stumbled upon a narrow trail that promised a way out of the woods, but it was lined with ancient, ominous totems carved with symbols that mirrored those I had seen within the cabin. My mind raced with dark hypotheses. Had those totems been erected to ward off the entity, or to summon it? As I ran, I heard the sound of soft, deliberate laughter. No, a chorus of voices in sorrowful agony, guiding me deeper into the clutches of the unknown. I eventually collapsed against the trunk of an enormous oak, shivering uncontrollably as I realized my heart could barely take another beat. In that desperate moment, I felt a presence coil around me like a tendril, a spectral hand brushing against my cheek, carrying a weight of centuries. Despite the terror, there was a strange intimacy in that ghostly touch, as if the entity meant not to harm me, but to connect me with its eternal suffering. I whispered an apology into the darkness, praying for mercy that I was not sure I deserved. It was then that I distinctly heard a voice, a mournful, raspy tone saying, "You are one of us now." The words burned into my soul, etching a permanent scar of despair and regret. The night dragged on with endless torment. I witnessed ephemeral figures drifting between the trees, their faces gaunt and eyes pleading silently for salvation. In moments of brief lucidity, I recalled fragments of the journal's warnings. The cabin had been built on cursed ground, had a nexus for trapped spirits whose violent end had birthed a curse. Each spectral encounter drove the knife of fear deeper into my heart. I could not tell where the living ended and the dead began. In a haze of terror, time dissolved and the forest became a shadow of nightmares. I cradled myself against the bitter cold, clutching remnants of sanity that seemed to slip further away with every passing minute. As dawn crept in, pale light filtering through twisted branches, I saw an apparition seated on a nearby rock, a young woman draped in rags, her eyes infinitely sorrowful. She beckoned me silently to follow her, promising an escape from the unrelenting horror. Driven by desperation, I trailed her, my footsteps tentative in the damp earth. She led me through a hidden path, one that twisted beneath gnarled roots and forgotten memories, until we reached an abandoned cemetery engulfed by nature's relentless reclaim. There, amidst crumbling headstones, she disclosed the cabin's dark secret. A ritual gone awry had trapped the souls of an entire family, their torment reawakening with every trespasser. In that moment, the weight of my fate pressed down on me. I was to become yet another captive of this cursed domain. With the first rays of sunlight, the haunting presence seemed to recede, and for a brief interlude, I believed I had escaped. But the reprieve was illusory. The scars left by that dreadful night were etched deeply into my being. I left the forest a changed person, haunted not only by what I had seen but by the realization that some horrors are eternal. I have since sought refuge in crowded cities and busy streets, yet the memory of that cabin persists, a relentless reminder that the darkest nightmares reside in places we least expect. Now, as I recount these events in trembling solitude, I see that the cabin and its cursed legacy are woven into the fabric of that ancient forest. Their sinister grip remains unbroken, a silent invocation to those who dare uncover what should remain buried. In the quiet moments of reflection, I sometimes hear the echoes of that ghostly laughter and feel the icy touch on my skin as the specters of the woods remind me that I survived only to forever be tethered to their sorrow. Each night, as sleep eludes me, I wonder if the spirits still follow, seeking to reclaim the fragments of humanity I once possessed. And so, I live in a state of perpetual watchfulness, haunted not solely by what I experienced, but by the gnawing fear that one day I might be lured back into that labyrinth of despair. I share my tale in hope that others might avoid the dark allure of that accursed place, for some doors, once opened, are impossible to close. Our chilling tale concludes here. Ready for the next ghostly whisper? I never imagined I'd find myself recounting these events, but the memory of that fateful weekend still gnaws at my sanity. I'm sitting here now, pen trembling in my grasp, compelled to share what truly happened at the cabin deep in the woods, a story I swear is as real as the cold bite of night air. I still remember the promise of a peaceful retreat with a few friends, a getaway from the city's chaos. The laughter and friendly banter we exchanged as we piled into the old van now seem distant echoes of a past life, a stark contrast to the terror that ensued. I recall the drive deep into the forest, the dirt road winding like a serpent beneath towering pines that seemed to whisper ancient secrets. The rustic cabin emerged from the haze of twilight, its wooden frame sagging under years of neglect. At first, its charm was undeniable, a perfect hideaway for a group seeking respite. But as night fell, the mood shifted into an ominous silence that blanketed the woodland. I could feel a prickling on the back of my neck, an inexplicable sensation that something was not right. On the first night, I lay awake on the creaking bed while the wind howled outside, its mournful wails blending with the rustling leaves. I convinced myself that every sound was merely nature's symphony. But then there were those noises, subtle thumps from below, like footsteps pacing slowly across the creaking floorboards. At first, I attributed them to my imagination, but as the hours wore on, each sound grew louder and more deliberate, a grim reminder that I was not alone. I remember whispering to myself in a tremulous voice, "This isn't happening. It can't be." The following morning, the air was still heavy with an eerie mist that clung to the trees. My friends tried to dismiss our anxiety with lighthearted jokes, but I noticed furtive glances and unease in their eyes. The day passed in a blur of forced activities, the exploration of the surrounding woods feeling more like a search for distractions than an adventure. We discovered animal tracks near the cabin's base, but none of us could determine their origin. The silence of the forest seemed to carry a secret too dark to share. That night, things escalated. I remember sitting around the creaky wooden table, the conversation halted by a sudden piercing scream emanating from somewhere deep within the forest. We rushed outside, hearts pounding in unison, only to see nothing but the oppressive gloom swallowing any trace of its source. It felt as if the woods themselves had swallowed the sound, as if they were taunting our helplessness. Anxiety turned into palpable dread as we realized that the cabin had become the epicenter of unspeakable horror. I lay in my bunk that night, eyes wide open, haunted by the feeling that eyes were watching me from the darkness beyond the window. I couldn't shake the notion that our presence had disturbed something older, something that resided in those cursed woods. My heart pounded with every creak and groan of the old house. In my delirium, I began to hear murmurs, the soft, indistinct voices of those who no longer walked among the living. They spoke in broken syllables, as though trapped in a limbo between life and death, their desperate pleas mingling with the howling wind. Then came the night that sealed our fate. I remember the sense of impending doom as the sky turned an unsettling shade of crimson. I was jolted awake by a deafening crash below. Summoning every ounce of courage, I crept down the narrow staircase to find my friends huddled together in terror. In the flickering light of a hastily kindled fire, we could see something slithering along the wall, shadows that moved with a life of their own. One of my friends, trembling as he pointed at the apparition, muttered, "It's as if the cabin itself is alive." I could only nod in silent agreement, overwhelmed by the irrational terror that gripped us all. The hours that followed were a harrowing blur of screams, desperate cries for help, and frantic attempts to escape the nightmare that had overtaken our retreat. I recall the sensation of cold, spectral hands brushing against my skin and the unmistakable sound of whispering voices urging me to flee deeper into madness. Our attempts to flee were thwarted at every turn, as if the forest was an endless labyrinth designed to trap souls forever. We sprinted into the darkness, our hearts pounding with the singular hope that daylight would grant us salvation. But the woods were unyielding, every twisting path leading us back to the accursed cabin. I still see the ruined faces of my friends in my nightmares. One by one, some were taken by the unseen force lurking in the dark, others simply vanished without a trace. I was left to wander the forest alone, the silence around me punctuated by cries that echoed off the trees. At some point, I lost track of time, hours, or perhaps days. Disoriented and on the brink of despair, I finally found refuge in a small clearing. There, bathed in the pale light of dawn, I made a silent promise to myself. I would survive this ordeal and let the world know of the horrors that lie hidden in the forest. Finding a way out was like navigating a maddening maze. Every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig seemed to herald an unseen pursuer. I could feel the eyes of the forest, cold and unrelenting, following my every move. In the distance, I heard the soft, eerie chanting of voices, a ritual to beckon the dead bed back from their slumber. It was a call I knew I must not answer. Summoning every scrap of inner strength, I ran until I could run no more, determined to escape the talons of the unknown. Eventually, when exhaustion had almost overtaken my senses, I stumbled upon a narrow dirt road. Salvation seemed near, a glimpse of humanity at the end of this nightmare. I flagged down a passing vehicle, and as the car's headlights pierced the gloom, I collapsed into the driver's arms, my ordeal slowly sinking into disbelief. Now, as I sit in this safe haven, recounting these memories in the hope that sharing them might exorcise my own demons, the voice of the cabin still lingers at the edges of my mind. I know too well that some places are cursed by more than just time. They are haunted by the weight of untold secrets and souls trapped between the living and the dead. The forest holds its stories dearly, murmuring them only to those unfortunate enough to listen too closely. These words are not born from the concoction of an overactive imagination, but from a raw, living reality. Every detail, the groaning of ancient wood, the whispered incantations in the dark, and the uncanny force that drove my friends away, remains etched into my very being. Even now, I carry the burden of that horrific night, a reminder that some haunted memories refuse to fade, no matter how far one runs or how much time passes. Our chilling tale concludes here. Ready for the next ghostly whisper? They say some places aren't haunted because of what happened there, but because of who is still waiting. My name is Jordan Park. I was 17 when my older brother Eli went missing near a place called Black Hollow, a patch of dense forest up in northern Minnesota. He was out on a solo photography trip, chasing some creepy urban legend about a cabin that only appears under certain conditions. Foggy nights, full moons, you name it. He was obsessed with abandoned places, thought they held echoes of human emotion. Whatever that meant, he never came back. After a year of dead-end searches and frustrating silence from the authorities, my parents gave up, but I couldn't. I had to know. So, the following October, I took his last GPS coordinates and went out there myself with a backpack, a flashlight, and a fading hope that maybe, just maybe, he was still alive. The deeper I hiked into the hollow, the quieter the world became. No birds. No wind. Even my phone stopped picking up a signal. After 3 hours, a thick fog rolled in, swallowing the path ahead of me like a living thing. And then, just like the story said, I saw it. A cabin. It wasn't old or ruined like I expected. It looked untouched. The kind of place you'd find in a 1940s painting. Simple wooden frame, a chimney puffing thin gray smoke, and a single rocking chair swaying slowly on the porch, though there was no wind to move it. Against every instinct I had, I walked up and knocked on the door. It opened by itself. Inside, it was cozy. Too cozy. Fire in the hearth, kettle on the stove, the smell of cinnamon and something sweet in the air. I should have run, but I stepped inside instead. The door slammed shut behind me. The room was dimly lit, and every surface was covered in framed photographs. I moved closer and realized they were all pictures of people, hundreds of them. Some were faded, others looked brand new. All of the subjects were staring directly into the lens, unsmiling, stiff, like school portraits taken in a hurry. My stomach turned when I found Eli. He was in a silver frame on the mantel. His eyes looked different, wide and glassy, like he'd seen something right before the shutter clicked. I reached for the photo, but as soon as I touched it, the room grew colder. The fire blinked out. Every frame rattled like a sudden gust had passed through, though the air was still. Then I heard the creaking. Upstairs, one step, then another. I backed toward the door, but it was gone. Not just shut. Gone. The wall was solid wood where it had been moments before. That's when the staircase revealed itself, stretching into a darkness that didn't belong in this world. A figure stood at the top, tall, thin, wearing what looked like a tattered shroud. No face, just a blur. But its head twitched in short, unnatural jerks. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. The thing raised its hand and pointed a finger at me. The room exploded in whispers. Dozens of voices, some pleading, others furious, all layered over each other in a sickening, echoing chorus. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the whispers were inside my head now. She took him. She wants you too. Say your name. Say it, and it's done. That's when I realized what they meant. The thing, the one upstairs, it needed a name to claim you. A full name. I kept my mouth shut. Ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just sprinted through the cabin, the halls stretching and folding like an impossible maze. Rooms that shouldn't exist opened into each other. An empty nursery, a meat locker, a church pew surrounded by mirrors, all filled with distant echoes of people crying or laughing or screaming. I finally burst into a room that looked like Eli's old bedroom. Same posters, same crooked lamp, even his hoodie thrown across the bed. And there he was, sitting at the desk, head down. Eli? I whispered. He didn't respond. I got closer, put my hand on his shoulder. He turned. And it wasn't Eli anymore. His eyes were black voids. His mouth opened wider than it should have. He smiled too much. And then he spoke in my voice. Jordan Park. The room shook violently. The walls peeled back, revealing thousands of eyes staring in from every direction. In that moment, I realized I had seconds. I did the only thing I could think of. I bit my own tongue hard enough to taste blood and screamed, "Not me!" The floor gave way. I woke up face down in the mud, halfway down a logging road, my pack beside me and my flashlight buzzing weakly. It was morning, sunlight, and in my pocket, Eli's silver photo frame. Only now he was smiling. I don't know how I got out, maybe because I never spoke my name, maybe because something else took my place. I've never gone back to Black Hollow. But I hear the stories. Every October, someone disappears. Hikers, photographers, curious teens, and sometimes not long after, I'll see a new photo appear in strange places. In the background of news clips, reflected in windows, on missing posters that disappear overnight. I don't tell people my full name anymore, and neither should you. Our chilling tale concludes here. Ready for the next ghostly whisper? I never imagined that a simple camping trip could etch a permanent scar on your soul. Until that relentless autumn night in the heart of the Appalachian backwoods. My name is Caleb Monroe, and I'm here to share what happened at the abandoned cabin of Red Creek Hollow, a tale I wish I could forget. Back then, I was just an adventurous soul seeking solace from urban life. I had planned a weekend escape with my old friend Sarah, hoping to reconnect with nature and perhaps capture some majestic photos of the fall foliage. We rented a battered, rust-colored SUV and drove for hours until we reached the craggy mountains of eastern Tennessee. The cabin itself was rumored to be cursed by those who once called it home, an isolated retreat shunned by locals since a series of tragedies decades ago. When we finally saw it, nestled between towering pines and gnarly oak trees, the structure looked more like a relic from another era than a simple shelter. Its weathered gray wood and broken shingles gave it an eerie, abandoned look, as if it carried all the sorrows and regrets of its lost occupants. Sarah and I set up camp on the overgrown clearing nearby. The sun dipped below the horizon quickly, ushering in a mist that slithered among the trees like lost souls. We joked about ghost stories to lighten the mood, but deep down, I felt a persistent chill, as if the wind whispered warnings I couldn't ignore. That first night, as I sat outside by a small fire while Sarah played soft music on her portable speaker, I began to feel the eerie presence of something unseen. At first, it was subtle, a rustle in the underbrush that didn't belong to any animal I recognized, or a gentle tug on the hem of my jacket. I brushed it off as the tricks my mind was playing under the influence of isolation and fatigue. But then came the whispering. I was curled up on my sleeping bag when I heard voices speaking softly outside our makeshift camp. The murmur wasn't like any conversation I'd ever heard. It was like a chorus of distant regrets, words that were nearly audible, yet layered with a deep sorrow, as though voices from the past were trying desperately to communicate. Sarah woke with a start, her eyes wide, but when she leaned over the firelight, there was nothing there. We exchanged uneasy looks and decided to call it a night, dismissing it as nothing more than a strong wind weaving through the trees. The next morning, the sun rose weakly behind a shroud of fog, and I decided to explore the cabin for potential photographic opportunities. Sarah was reluctant, but I convinced her that this was exactly the kind of story that could revitalize our long-dormant passions for adventure. I grabbed my camera and made my way toward the cabin alone, while Sarah remained at camp, supposedly to photograph the rustic landscape. Inside, the cabin was a stark contrast from the barren exterior. The interior walls were lined with faded wallpaper depicting pastoral scenes, but now peeled and stained by time and neglect. Dust lay thick upon the floor and furniture, as if the house itself had been sleeping for centuries. I roamed from room to room, trying to capture the ambiance when I came across a small study. There, on a creaking desk, lay an old, leather-bound ledger. Its pages were filled with handwritten names and dates spanning back over 100 years. As I flipped through, one entry caught my eye, a date from the 1920s, scribbled in a shaky hand alongside a name, Caleb Monroe. I froze. It was uncanny, as though the ledger was meant for me, a dark record in a forgotten register. I left the study with a sense of foreboding that grew heavier with each step. On my way out of the room, I passed a narrow hallway that wasn't there before, a corridor lined with dim sconces that flickered without reason. At the end of the hallway, a door was slightly ajar. Curiosity got the best of me, and I pushed it open, revealing what looked like a small parlor. Its centerpiece was an ornate mirror set in a gilded frame that still shimmered despite the gloom of the room. I stood before it, studying my reflection, when a movement caught my peripheral vision, a shadow slipping past behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. The mirror, however, seemed to throb with an unexplainable energy, as if it were a portal to another realm. I hurried back to camp, my mind reeling and heart pounding in my ears. Sarah found me outside, my face ashen and eyes vacant. "What happened, Caleb?" she asked, her voice trembling. I couldn't find the words to explain the dread that now coursed through my veins. I hesitated to reveal the ledger or mention the whispers of voices, fearing that she might think I was losing my grip on reality. I simply said I felt unwell and went to sleep that night, praying for forgetfulness. That night, the cabin seemed to call to me through my dreams, a persistent vision of a ghostly figure pleading for release. I woke up drenched in sweat as the same mournful voice whispered, "Remember our names." I couldn't identify if it was coming from within or around the cabin. The sensation was unbearable, and I convinced Sarah that we should leave immediately. We gathered our belongings in a rushed frenzy, but as we approached the car, something strange happened. The woods around us seemed to distort. Paths we remembered from the day before vanished into dense thickets, and eerie fog began to envelop the clearing. Desperation grew as we tried to navigate our way back to civilization. The night fell again, dark and relentless, and with each step, the weight of unseen eyes pressed upon us. Then, in a clearing not far from our camp, we encountered a spectral figure, an elderly man in tattered clothes, his eyes deep pools of sorrow. "You have brought back what was meant to be sealed away," he intoned in a brittle whisper that echoed through the silence of the night. Before we could ask any questions, he faded into the mist as if he were never there. Sarah and I ran without looking back, our breath ragged and hearts pounding in terror. The forest became an unyielding maze, and it wasn't long before I could no longer tell if it was reality or hallucination. Every rustle, every snap of a branch resembled the echo of that elderly man's cryptic words. We heard footsteps behind us, multiple sets, neither our own nor those of any creature known to Earth. It felt as if the very souls trapped within the cabin had followed us, determined to reclaim their freedom through us. At one point, I tripped over a root and fell hard, my camera scattering across the ground. When I retrieved it, I found one last photo captured, a blurred, spectral face that looked distinctly like my own, but twisted into a silent scream. That image haunted me as we pressed on, each step taking us deeper into the unforgiving labyrinth of the forest. Eventually, as dawn stretched its pale fingers across the horizon, we emerged onto a narrow, abandoned logging road, our bodies exhausted, but our escape secured. I never spoke of the ledger or the mirror, but I've tried to forget the series of events that night. Every time I see my reflection, I sometimes catch a glimpse of a stranger, a shadow of a man with haunted eyes, silently urging me to remember those written names. I now live with the quiet terror that I might one day return to Red Creek Hollow, compelled by a promise made in the dark. It's been years since that harrowing ordeal, and I've tried to rebuild my life far away from those cursed woods. But on quiet nights, When the wind howls through the trees, I can't help but wonder if the spirits of the cabin have found a way to follow me, reminding me that some names are etched in darkness, refusing to be forgotten. Our chilling tale concludes here. Ready for the next ghostly whisper?